You can get your Bibles ready. We're going to be in 2 Samuel 15. We're cruising. We are more than halfway past. We're almost done. The finish line is in sight when it comes to 2 Samuel. Bittersweet for me. I love 1 and 2 Samuel. But I can now see the end. In fact, in my young adults group, we have finished 2 Samuel. And so it's kind of sad, the end of an era. But I still have more time with you here, and so I'm excited for that. I'm going to tell you something that happens just as we start, but this happens in academics. It was a very popular saying for a very long time, and it was basically, it doesn't matter where you start, it matters where you finish. And the sentiment was often used in academics when it came to the evidence. I mean, if you get on I-5 and you're heading north, it doesn't matter if you get on it when you're in Eugene or you get on it when you're in Kaiser, or you get on it when you're in Portland. If you get on it, whether south or north, the destination is the same. It's a straight shot. That's great. And so in academics, they say, look, if you just follow the evidence, it doesn't matter who you are, you're going to get to the right conclusion. That we now know is false. That's not true. It actually does matter where you start. This is in I-5. And one of the biggest examples that we have is when it comes to the truth claims of Christianity. There are two really famous Bible scholars. One is Bruce Metzger, and the other is Bart Ehrman. One is an atheist, and one is an evangelical Christian. Now, Bruce Metzger is where we get so much of our understanding of ancient Greek in the Bible. They study ancient manuscripts. And Bruce Metzger's student, sort of his protege, was Bart Ehrman. But when Bart Ehrman would look at the gospel, the same gospel that Bruce is looking at, they came to different conclusions. The same evidence, different conclusions. Why is it that they're studying the same exact textual material, and one is saying, doesn't this speak to the truth of God's holy word? And the other is saying, this is all wrong. And it's very simple. When Bruce Metzger sees something in a story, like the story of the feeding of the 5,000, now Bruce is going to say, this is so well attested. It's in every gospel. Oh my goodness, it's in all of our texts. When you look at all of our ancient manuscripts, all of it is so consistent. There's no historical document better attested than our Old and our New Testament. In fact, when we had documents that were thousands of years apart, in terms of for instance, we had a medieval text of Isaiah, and then we find the Dead Sea Scrolls, and we're like, whoa, we just closed the gap by 1,000 years. And what we found was, they're the same. They're the same. Really, the only difference is how things are spelled. Color, the true Pledge of Allegiance American way to spell color, or the wrong way to spell color, if you're in Britain, right? So obviously, you look at this and the way things are spelled can change, but it's the same word. It's the same word, and you look and say, man, it's also accurate. Well, Bart Ehrman looks at the feeding of the 5,000. He looks at all of the miracles of Jesus in the New Testament, and he says, well, we know this didn't happen. Bruce was like, why? I mean, it's so well attested. It's in every one of these texts. These are eyewitness accounts. What's going on? He's like, well, we know it didn't happen because it can't happen. We know it didn't happen because it can't happen. Let's be fair to Bart, because this makes sense. If my son ran into my room and said, Dad, I just flew. I'm like, no, you didn't. Yes, I did. I was in my room. I jumped off the bed, floated there 5 minutes. I'm like, no, you didn't. He's like, what do you mean? I absolutely did. I'm like, no, Rogan, 100% didn't happen. I love you, but you didn't fly. Maybe something got so weird in your brain that you thought you flied, right? See, the problem is if all kinds of people started coming and be like, I was there. Kid flew. Like, no, it didn't. It couldn't have happened. It couldn't. Well, Bart Ehrman, who's the atheist, he looks at these and he says, because miracles are impossible, we must find an alternative explanation for each of these supposed miracles. You know what happened? A little boy came up and shared his food. Aw, that's nice. It just made everyone else say, I guess I'll share too, right? And they all pulled out their pocket fish and their pocket loaves and just started sharing their food that they just were like, I have old fish in my pocket. I guess if the boy's going to do it, I will too, right? If someone pulled out a chicken nugget from their pocket, are you eating that? It's like, I have this to share. I'm like, share it with only your mouth because that's not going in mine. So his explanation is just everybody started sharing. Yeah, that explains all of that. Because he starts with the presupposition that miracles are impossible, he can never, ever, ever, ever get to the conclusion that miracles were done. Right? Where you start can determine where you finish. Well, that's the truth in our lives, and I want you to hold on to just that little bit as we get into 2 Samuel chapter 15. Because think about where we're starting. Okay? Absalom, the third-born son of King David. Now, there is a second-born son I didn't mention. I'll give it to you. His name's Kileab. Oh, maybe I did mention, but he's likely dead. He's only mentioned once. He's not in the succession plan. Amnon, of course, was killed by Absalom. He's out of the picture. So now there really is the third in line, but must be the guy, Absalom. Here he is. He's ready to be king. In his own heart and in his own head, he wants to be king because he thinks to himself, I'll do it better. Because my dad, he's bad at justice. My dad's no good at justice because he didn't give his son Amnon justice. I had to do that. My brother, I had to kill my own brother. Don't clip that. That's not me saying that. And what happened to Tamar, he didn't do anything there. He didn't reconcile with Absalom. He's like, man, David's bad at justice. I would do it better. That's where we're starting because Absalom went into exile on his own account. Now, what I want you to know is that he went to a place called Geshur. And you might not know this, but this is going to really tie in an important way because we're going to see Ahithophel who's going to come later. In Geshur was a king of Geshur named King Talmai. Now he was the grandfather of Absalom. And Joshua was supposed to conquer Geshur. They were in this Canaanite land. It's part of the promised land. So this is an unconquered area. And so when Absalom did that wrong thing, he ran to his grandfather and he lived with him. Now, this is not Jewish influence. This isn't somebody who's going to look at God's holy law and say, let me give you advice from God. This is, while it's his grandfather, it's a foreign king who doesn't have the word of God, who worships idols. Think about the sort of influence he's getting. He ran away to get influence not from the Jewish kingdom, but from a pagan kingdom. But it's his grandfather, so he has that. And all of this is going to kind of explode, but I want you to hold on to that he went to Geshur. Then David goes, and he does bring his son back at the behest of Joab, his commander, and they just don't reconcile. They just sort of exist together for 2 years of bitterness. Finally, they're able to get into a room with one another. But I think maybe we have this in our family sometimes, where it's like two people are just existing together, not because they like each other, not because things are solved, but because it's family and you both are at the same event. But you're like, I'm going to just make this work. I'm going to bite my tongue, not say the things I want to say, not do the things I want to do. And when it's over, it's over. There's no reconciliation. That's where we're starting. So Absalom is stewing over not experiencing justice from his father. So that's the angle we're going to see. All right, there's your recap. Here we go. Sometime later, after Absalom and David got together and didn't exile, sometime later, Absalom managed to acquire a chariot and horses, as well as 50 men to serve as his royal guard. Now Absalom used to get up early and stand beside the road that led to the city gate. Whenever anyone came by who had a complaint to bring to the king for arbitration, Absalom would call out to him, "What city are you from?" The person would answer, "I, your servant, am from one of the tribes of Israel." Absalom would then say to him, "Look, your claims are legitimate and appropriate, but there is no representative of the king who will listen to you." Absalom would then say, "If only they would make me a judge in the land. Then everyone who had a judicial complaint could come to me, and I would make sure he receives a just settlement." So Absalom goes into a position where he knows people are going to be going to the king and say, "Wow, what you're saying is true. It's actually a super good point. If only I were in charge. I would have settled it for you. But I'm going to tell you, I'm going to be honest. You head down this road to the king, nothing's going to happen. You're not going to receive a just settlement. If only I were in charge." And so that person is probably thinking, "Yeah, if only you were in charge. Man, then I would get what I need." Notice that he listens and just says, "You got a point." You have to know that some people are coming there with the worst points ever, right? "So I had a hog, and then I sold it to somebody, but then later I realized I could have made a little bit more money, and I was mad, and he wouldn't pay me more." That's a real good point, dude. Yeah, you deserve justice. Like, you should get that money. I agree with you. If only for me in charge, right? It's like, actually, no, that's a real dumb idea. You sold that hog and realized later you shouldn't, and so too bad, right? Maybe your next hog you sell for what you should sell, right? That's how it works, bud. Sorry. Instead, you just come and you just say what's going to please that person because you want them on your side. Wow, is that not the way that advice often happens in the world? As if in us, the way to be a good friend is only to say good things to the ear, right? But saying good things to the ear doesn't bring good things. You want to say good things, period. And that might be saying real hard things, but true things that are good for the soul of the person. Actually, you are wrong. I'm sorry, but you got to hear it. I said this before, but it is the American Idol problem, where too many people in that person's life are yes people. "Oh, honey, you've got a beautiful voice." Yeah. You know what would be good for you? Go on stage in front of millions of people and show off that voice, right? You just set that person up for utter failure, right? They go on stage and everyone else is like, "Oh, who told you that?" Right? How about you have the hard conversations today? "Love you. You got a beautiful voice to me because I'm your mom. But it doesn't ring the same in other ears, you know? It bounces off those eardrums in a way that for them, no, honey, I love you. But for them, it's going to sound like things are dying, right? And so I would stay off that stage, maybe voice lessons, or, give it up. Give it up. Like, some things exist only as dreams. This is one of them. But that's the problem, is that we almost skirt away from the truth because we're so scared to hurt feelings. But I can tell you, sometimes hurt feelings restore souls. Sometimes just telling people the honest truth, like I will sit down and I will have honest conversations with my son. You know what he'll do sometimes? He'll cry because he's sad, because he doesn't like that. But I don't go, oh, now that you're crying, yeah, here's a tablet, watch it all day. I'll give you what you want. Forming habits of giving people what they need is really what the church should be. Here's what you need. You need to know the truth. The truth for you right now could be a little bit hard. I'm not saying say it harshly, say it truly and say it lovingly, but you must say it. Well, he's there, Gesher, probably not getting a good illustration, but I want to give you an example. We're going to go together to Luke 15, 11 through 32. This is Jesus. I think Jesus gives the best parable for what reconciliation looks like. All of you will be familiar with this story because it's the story of the prodigal son. So you'll notice the key differences for how Absalom and David experienced sort of quasi, really not real reconciliation, and then how Jesus demonstrates reconciliation. And then I'll point you to some things about really the larger context of what Jesus is doing here. But if you go to Luke 15, all right, Luke 15, starting at verse 11. Mine says the parable of the compassionate father. Then Jesus said, a man had two sons. Can I give you context really quickly here? There are Pharisees here. And the Pharisees need to hear this because the Pharisees are part of the story. I want you to think about who the Pharisees are in this story because they're here. If you don't know, a Pharisee's a teacher of the law. They're very strict about following the law. And this idea of a relationship with God is foreign. Then Jesus said, a man had two sons. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of the estate that will belong to me. So he divided his assets between them. After a few days, the younger son gathered together all he had and left on a journey to a distant country. And there he squandered his wealth with a wild lifestyle. Then, after he had spent everything, a severe famine took place in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and worked for one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to the fields to feed pigs. Remember, these are Jews. Feeding pigs, wildly low. Some of you do feed pigs, maybe. But if you're a Jewish, you wouldn't even get near a pig. Like this, so to the lowest of the low for a Jewish person. And by doing that, I lost my spot. Okay. Yes, 16. He was longing to eat the carob pods the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. But when he came to his sense, he said, how many of my father's hired workers have food? Enough to spare. But here I am dying from hunger. I will get up and go to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. You'll notice this in the New Testament. They don't actually often say the name for God. So this is a replacement word because they treat the name of God as so holy that they will use alternatives. So to sin against heaven is a euphemism for sinning against God, so you don't have to say the word. So here, you're sinning against God. Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired workers or servants. So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way from home, his father saw him, and his heart went out to him. He ran and hugged his son and kissed him. Then his son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his slaves, Hurry, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let us eat and celebrate, because this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So they began to celebrate. Now his older son was in the field. As he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the slaves and asked what was happening. The slave replied, "Your brother has returned, and your father has killed the fattened calf, because he got his son back safe and sound." But the older son became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and appealed to him. But he answered his father, "Look, these many years I have worked like a slave for you, and I never disobeyed your commands. Yet you never gave me even a goat so that I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, he has devoured your assets with prostitutes. You killed the fattened calf for him." Then the father said to him, "Son, you are always with me, and everything that belongs to me is yours. It was appropriate to celebrate and be glad for your brother. For your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found." Now, what you'll see in this story, it's a story of reconciliation. Number one, repentance. We've talked about that. The son says, "I'm going to plan this out in my heart. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go back and let him know that I was wrong, that I sinned." Now, the father was always ready to reconcile. Notice that he didn't just turn this cold shoulder and say, "I am not going to do anything to reach out to you until I hear you say those words." Because the father ran to the son even before the words were said. Because the coming back really was in the action of coming back. But the fullness of reconciliation came when the son admitted, "I was wrong." And the father said, "Well, then let me restore you. I should get less now. Yeah, but I'm going to give you more." It's this great balance of mercy and justice. Now, if you don't know, the people in this story here are the Pharisees. The Pharisees are the older brother. The one who's like, "Well, wait. I've been good this whole time." And rather than celebrating the return of the younger son, he's mad because he didn't get something. And it doesn't give a reply here from the older son. Why? Because Jesus leaves that open, because the Pharisees are right there. How will you accept reconciliation of people who were lost and now found? Will you sit there and say, "Yeah, but they deserve to be punished," right? He came back and he said, "I have sinned," but all the older brothers saying, "Yeah, but you did that by squandering his wealth. You even had prostitutes. This isn't right." Now, in order for God to prepare his prophets, oftentimes he would put them in positions that they would really understand God's perspective on things. There's probably no greater example than in the story of Hosea, where Hosea is told to go out and marry a prostitute by God. Imagine being chosen by God to be his very mouthpiece to people, and God says, "Okay, but I really want to prepare you. I want to give you an honest perspective of what it's like," right? So you're going to speak for me, so I want you to get a sense of how I feel. I got a wife for you. Yes, some of you, that may be easy. It'd be nice if God just says, "I picked the wife for you," because you're like, "This is the one for sure," right? Because God picked it. Anyways, "Hosea, I want you to marry a prostitute." He's like, "Okay, well, that's not what I had in mind." And he's like, "Here's the thing. You're going to marry her, and then she's going to cheat on you a lot. Yeah, she's going to run away. So what are you going to do?" He might be thinking like, "Well, I'm kind of done with her. Like, that's pretty bad. He says, no. You're going to pursue her. You're going to chase her, and you're going to try to bring her back into reconciliation. And you will. It'll work. But she'll do it again. And you'll have kids. And they won't be yours. They're going to be from all the men she's been sleeping with. But you'll raise them. Yeah. And just keep pursuing her. God, this is terrible. He's like, yeah, isn't it? Isn't it? Every single time I run with open arms to the people I love, they stay for a little bit, but then they run off and have children with foreign gods, right? And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get them back. That is the story, the fullness of which we see in the person of Jesus. It was his getting us back. It was his looking at us and say, well, weren't they wayward? Didn't they squander their inheritance on all of these bad things? I'm going to get them back. I'm going to go and I'm going to fight for them, not because they deserve it, but despite the fact that they don't. Man, this reconciliation, but the fullness of which you can really see in your life by saying, I've sinned. The Pharisees had a very karmic understanding of justice. In fact, when you study world religions, most world religions do. There's sort of two competing beliefs. There's like the view that's in Islam, which is just mercy. That's it. And I'll explain that to you in a sec. Just mercy. And then in other world religions, it's usually just justice. Karma is you getting what you deserve always. Yeah, whether in this life or the next, you will reap what you sow always. And so there's this divine justice where it always happens. There's no reprieve. And yet, when you read Islam, they're on the total other end. It's just mercy. God forgives because he just can. There's no need for a payment. So there's really no justice here. He just gets rid of it. It's gone. So if there's a debt, imagine you're in a courtroom, this would be really bad, and someone stole $100,000 from you, and you're, oh man, that guy owes me. And then they go to court, because that's a big crime there. And the judge says, you know what? You're forgiven. You're going to be sitting there like, what? Wait, that's my money. Like, I'm owed. Hello, where's the justice? Excuse me. I gave this person mercy. It's like, but I want justice. So what is happening here? Well, easy. When Jesus is talking about this, it's in Matthew, it's in Mark, it's in Luke, and it's in John, but he says something about a cup, the clearest of which are in the Synoptic Gospels, when he says, Abba, Father, I know all things are possible for you. Can you make this cup pass from me? And some would just say, oh, that means Jesus didn't want the cross because he says, not my will, but yours. See, that's not good enough. That's not big enough. Because we know from Jeremiah chapter 25 what is in that cup. And it is the fullness of the wrath of God. Because God's justice against sin has to happen. The problem is, you are the recipients. You are the recipients. And so by Jesus saying, I'll drink the cup, all of it. That means the fullness of the wrath of God would be on Jesus, and justice would not be ignored, but it would be satisfied in the person of Jesus. So this justice that the Pharisees want on this person, well, no, that son needs to be punished. Come on, I was good, I deserve it. Because I did good things, what I deserve is good things. And since they did bad things, what he deserves is bad things. Don't forgive it. But guess whose inheritance it was? It was the Father's. And so by forgiving it, it doesn't mean money came out of nowhere. It means he paid the price. The Father paid the price of the missing inheritance. He took it on himself. In the same way, Jesus takes it on himself, the fullness of the wrath, because it was poured out on you. It's this mercy you not getting what you do deserve, which is justice, the wrath of God. But then there's one other thing, and it's really unique to Christianity, and it is grace. Think about this. He could have said, I do forgive you. Welcome back into my home. But then he gave him something he didn't deserve. Sandals, a ring on his finger, a celebration. He didn't deserve it. So not only does God take the justice of wrath upon himself, satisfying that, but he also gives us something more, abundantly more than we deserve. And we have to understand that in our life. Not only do we get sort of reprieve, we get abundance in Jesus. We get so much more than we'll ever need. This example then that we see in Absalom is not reconciliation at all. It's not there. It's not happening. And because it doesn't start off right, it's going to end pretty tragically. The famous line, it's from a Christian author. Her name's, her last name's Wilson. I can't remember. I think Sandra Wilson. She's a doctor. It was in 1993 that she wrote a famous book called Hurt People, Hurt People. And it's remained true that hurt people hurt people. And Absalom is a hurt person. And because that hurt was never identified and dealt with, it's going to lead to him hurting people. We see it in studies of abuse. If you were abused, you will likely abuse, unfortunately, unless you deal with it. Unless you meaningfully deal with it, because it's what you know, and you often do the things that you know. And so it is cyclical in this way. Philippians 2:3 says this: instead of being motivated by selfish ambition or vanity, each of you should, in humility, be moved to treat one another as more important than yourself. This is really hard. If David was treating Absalom, his son, as more important than himself, he would run to Absalom at the return. And maybe because of that great love, Absalom would be motivated in return to admit what is really causing trouble here. I've sinned. I was wrong. Matthew 23:27 says this: woe to you, experts in the law, and you Pharisees, hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs that look beautiful on the outside, but inside are full of the bones of the dead and everything unclean. The Pharisees that Jesus were dealing with in this time had all the right actions, but really all the wrong motives. Why were they doing the things that they were doing? Because they desperately wanted to deserve things. They wanted to deserve heaven, but there's no amount of doing that will ever get you there. Now, in this case with Absalom and David, he's building up now an army, but an image for himself. I'm going to walk you through the image building he's doing. He's really good at it. One, he's already beautiful from the top of his head to the soles of his feet. Beautiful guy, he's got long, beautiful hair. You know, people are going to look at him and think, man, isn't he just the image of a king? Doesn't he just look good? In the same way that the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were whitewashed tombs. In other words, there's dead things inside. You might look good on the inside, but there's dead things inside. What's dead in Absalom is the bitterness of unrepentance, the bitterness of not being reconciled. So that is motivating why he's doing the things he's doing. He's going to one of the most prominent places. The city gate, mentioned all throughout the Bible, it is the place, it's the economic center, the center of justice. It's just the place that people would go to settle disputes. So he knows where he's going. He's going to go there. Chariot was a sign of power. It says he was able to acquire a chariot and men. Now he's got the image. All these people standing around him. There's been lots of sort of prank videos that are done where they just get a random person who's not famous at all, has nothing about him. They put a nice jacket on, nice suit, some glasses, and then they have like 50 people walk around them as if they're important. And everyone's like, whoa, whoa. People even go like, can I have your autograph? Sure, my name's Bob Little. You know, like, whoa, I got Bob Little's autograph. Who's that? Yeah, but he's famous, right? He must be famous. Look at all these people. So he's a big deal. Everyone's thinking he's a big deal. The evaluation of why we're doing the things we're doing is really important here. Because Absalom probably isn't sitting and reflecting and saying, man, why am I doing these things? Why? It's because I hate my father? Is it mad at my father? I just want people to love me because I feel very unloved. Did it start here? Does he already have the end in mind? We don't know these things, but we do know where it started. We know it started from a place of bitterness from not being purposefully reconciled. When I was a kid, I loved the candy Warheads. They're very sour. I think they were even more sour when I was a kid. That's how I remember it. And I would eat so many that my tongue would get cuts on it. And then it would, be even worse. But I worked at it. Sometimes I begrudgingly ate Warheads. Why? Because I could have gotten a different candy, but it was always Warheads because they had little cutouts on the bag that if I got enough, I could send in. And if I paid just shipping and handling of $24.95, I would get an exclusive Warhead stuffed animal. Yeah. And so I remember other kids being like, oh, I got this. It's so good. And it's like, why? I'm going to finish this bag of Warheads. It's like, but your mouth is falling apart. Like, it's worth it. Watch. What a terrible reason to eat candy because you're supposed to enjoy it. But in this case, it got to kind of a crucial point where I didn't. Sometimes I do that with food. It's like, got to eat everything on the plate. It's like, that's a big plate. And then it gets to a point where like, now I'm just uncomfortable eating. Well, in this case, that wasn't good. And I got that stuffed animal. And just for $24.95, I got this little, right? Yeah, it was a fit in your pocket kind of stuffed animal. It was totally not worth it. Well, that's often what will happen if we ever get to the conclusions of doing things for the wrong reasons. We usually end up in a place where we'll say, that wasn't worth it. That wasn't worth it. If you live for God on purpose, here's what you'll always get to say, that was worth it. But that's also a problem because the only way to live for God is on purpose. You don't wake up one day and accidentally say, I think I've been a Christian this whole time. Like that's wild. I didn't even realize it, but I am a Christian. No, you do that on purpose. You live for Jesus on purpose. You have to not do the things that maybe you want to do. You got to do that on purpose. Matthew 7:15 says a warning for us. Watch out for false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are voracious wolves. I see that here with Absalom. He's got something brewing in him that is for him and not for the good of his people. He's got a bone to pick, and that bone to pick is with his father. And it uses a line which is that, I'll just read it. So it says here, I'm in Luke. I was like, it does not say it at all. What's happening? Let me go back to Luke, to Samuel here. Okay. So if only you would make me a judge, if you remember, in the land, then everyone who had a judicial complaint could come to me, and I would make sure he receives a just settlement. Then it says this, verse 5. When someone approached to bow before him, Absalom would extend his hand and embrace him and kiss him. Absalom acted this way toward everyone in Israel who came to the king for justice. In this way, Absalom won the loyalty of the citizens of Israel. So the Hebrew there is he stole their hearts. And it's the same word used in Exodus for the Ten Commandments to steal, which is vogenev, and it's to take or to do it the wrong way. So using that commandment language, thou shalt not steal, well, he stole their hearts. So the implication is the heart wasn't intended to be his. It wasn't. He wasn't king. He's certainly not God. So he stole them. He stole their very hearts for illicit purposes. He took them by pretending to be this arbiter of justice, by telling everyone the same thing. This, no matter their claim, oh, if it were me, this would be settled in a way that you would love. So of course people are going to fall in love because you want to get the things that you want to get. And if all you're ever hearing are the things you want to hear, it's kind of the person you want to be around. I remember when I worked at the Fun Center, there was a kid going around at the time who was a pathological liar. But even still, sometimes I would be like, man, I want that to be true. He's like, you know what? I know a guy who works for Microsoft. I actually am going to get everyone here an Xbox. He's a pathological liar. I know that's not true. But even still, I was like, can I have one? You know? Just in case, right? Just in case. Like, put me on that list. I know it won't happen. But just in case, I do want one. Like, I want that clear. But so this hope, like you just want the things you want, and sometimes you're more likely to lean into hope even if it's not founded, because you want it. Oh man, do we do this with our kids? In fact, when my son lied for the first time ever, I'm sure that's not true, but his cousins, he said something to his cousins that he shouldn't have said, and when I confronted him, he's like, I didn't say that. There you go. It's settled. My son wouldn't do that. He didn't say it. And then when it comes out that he did, what? Dude, you lied to me. You made me look so bad. I hoped for the best in you, right? And then you lied. That's hard, like when those things happen, because especially as parents, you will lean into the honesty of your son or daughter. But sometimes you also have to be realistic and know that, yes, even your kids can lie. Even they can lie. Can you have those hard conversations and really get to the bottom? And in this case, these people heard what they wanted. They heard what they wanted, and so they're already settling in their hearts, this is a guy I want to follow. Hey, does that ever happen in the church? I like this guy. You know, he says things, but never really makes me feel bad when I don't do them. I think we watched a video, right? It's kind of like, it's good to hear, but doesn't call me to any real change in my life. I like that. I like going to church, feeling good about myself, and then I leave. Here's what I promise. Some days, you might actually leave church feeling pretty badly about yourself, because all of you are sinners, myself included, and all of you have things in you that God wants to change. And so maybe you will get confronted someday with that change and say, oh no, that one's for me. That's hard to hear. I hope you have those moments. So ask yourself what purpose you're doing things for. There's a really good study. This was done in the 70s, and it was with monkeys, back when you could do all kinds of wild things. And it was easy. They had a case or a very nice established enclosure with all the veterinarian standards. And I don't know if that's true, but they put a banana at the top of the ceiling. Of course, the monkeys could get it. But when they went up and tried to get the banana, they sprayed all the monkeys with a fire hose of cold water. And there's a blah, right, and go wild. And eventually, that banana just stood there and nobody did anything. They were trained. Don't touch the banana or all of us suffer. They brought a new monkey in and took one out. What do you think the first thing that new monkey tried to do was? Why ain't anybody getting that banana, right? He climbs up, hose is ready. No. The other 4 monkeys grab that monkey down and start hitting him. What are you doing? Touch that, we're all going to suffer. Eventually, they slowly replace all of the monkeys to where all 5 monkeys in that enclosure don't even know what happens if you touch the banana. They just know you don't touch it. And so now there are 5 monkeys with a banana floating there. None of them know why you can't touch it. They just know you don't, or something bad is going to happen. Maybe, we don't know. But this happens in our life. I was talking to a lady who told me about how she was cutting meat on, I think it's called a pot roast, but she would cut the ends off. And then her husband finally asked, like, why do you cut the ends off of the pot roast? She's like, I don't know. That's what my mom always did. That's how she taught me. And so she called her mom and said, Mom, why do we cut the ends off the pot roast? She's like, oh, well, it's because that's how my mom taught me. It's like, oh, okay. And so she calls Grandma and says, Grandma, why do you cut the ends off the pot roast? And she's like, oh, what? Like, because if that's why do we do this? She's like, oh, I just always had a pan that was too small, so I had to cut the ends off. It's like, what? This whole time we're wasting all this meat because we never asked why we do it this way? It's just how we do it. We owe it to ourselves to be more reflective about the things that we're doing. Why are we doing it that way? Is it because of selfishness in us? Well, you might not see it if you're not reflective enough. Sometimes you will do things. For instance, that older son, why are you saying the things you're doing? Or, sorry, why are you saying those things about your younger son? Oh, because, I guess it's because I'm jealous. I guess it's because I have a sense of justice that it's not being met, and it bothers me. So I actually want the worst in this person because I'm jealous that they're receiving something that I want. Man, that can happen. When you look at the sort of mercy and grace and justice satisfied system that God has, there will be people who receive abundantly from God. And if we look at them and say, just not fair, they deserve to get the worst, we are not living in the way that Christ calls us to live. Absalom's doing this with his father. He is. Does he want the best? Right now, he is preparing to do the worst. Okay, so let's read it, or let's hear it. So he worked hard. It says Absalom would rise early, there in the text. Beside the way of the gate, I already told you that the city gate was the center of political, legal, and economic activity. You see it in Boaz, chapter 4, where that's where the legal matter was settled. You see it in Proverbs. It says a wise husband is, quote, respected at his city gate. Genesis 19:1, Lot sat at the city gate as a judge in Sodom. That's where judges would go. If only I were a judge, there at the city gate. So he looked for troubled people, anyone who had a lawsuit. That was his objective. So anyone coming to the city gate who has a lawsuit, I'm going to focus on them. And then he would call to them. So he reached out to troubled people. He took a personal interest. He'd ask, what city are you from? Probably it was more of, his purpose was not to really get to know these people. It was because he had a score to settle and he knew how to do it. He sympathized with the person. Your case is good and right. He never attacked David directly. Because he says, no deputy of the king to hear you. He didn't say, hey, David gets it wrong. He just, there's no deputy to hear you. Man, what we need is a judge. Now, you could have judges that weren't kings, but really what he's trying to set himself up as is in a position of power, like if I were the number one judge. Because if you go to arbitration, you're allowed to appeal to the king. So he's preempting that and standing in the way. He left the troubled person more troubled. He left the troubled person more troubled by saying, you do have a case, but it won't be settled. So rather than getting these people to feel good about their position, he made them go away feeling like, why are you even here? It won't matter. I mean, it would matter if it were me in charge. As I transition into more positions of leadership, one of the things that I have to be really cognizant about is the way in which you try to encourage others to see the best in people around you. Because I'm not working with anybody who's like malevolent or evil. And encouraging people to say, well, yeah, this person probably had good reasons for it. I am a number one advocate for parents because, of course, sometimes kids will come with a score to settle with their parents. Like, they're too hard on me. I had to do X, Y, Z. And so they might be looking to me to say, you know what, you're right. What a terrible thing to say, right? You are right. But, I'm not your parent. So go home and be feeling justified, but also terrible that you'll never feel reprieve. Yeah. Anyway, see you later. What good counsel. How about, your parents are doing this because they love you. Or maybe I don't necessarily agree with their parents, but reminding them that that your parents are doing this for the first time. They've never been in this position. And sometimes even parents can get things wrong, but they love you and they're trying. And you know what you should do? You should really sit down and try to have an honest conversation with your parents. Because they're not doing anything because they hate you. They're invested in you. Even their discipline is because of their love. Okay, good. I'm not sending them home more troubled. I'm setting them home with a way to try to see the best in their parents and reconcile with them. I mean, that's not what Absalom is doing. Why? Because he has purposes that are selfish. When we give advice to people, we should ask, what are the purposes here? Is it because it's going to make this person like me more? Sometimes our advice is, I want this person to really like me, so I'm going to give them advice I know they want to hear. I already told you this before, but I'm going to say it again. When you really love somebody, you will be willing for them to hate you. That means that the cost of telling them what they desperately need to hear, if the result is they hate you, you must be willing to pay it. Right? You will not help them by hurting them. And by telling them things that are not true, you are leaving them more troubled than they were before. And that's exactly what Absalom is doing. So we often will ourselves blindly follow cultural habits, traditions, or peer pressure without asking whether or not they're good or right. This chariot that Absalom had, roads, especially in Rome, were designed to carry two horses side by side and one chariot down the way. That's how the Roman roads were done. All of these things, this distance, is exactly why our railroads are, I think it's 4 feet 8 inches. And because it all traces back to the ruts on Roman roads. And a lot of people don't realize that the trains themselves, the tracks, the width, all go back to something arbitrary, which were the ruts in a Roman road. And understanding where things start can be helpful for us, because maybe the way forward is backwards. Maybe where you're at right now, the way that you can actually achieve success is by going back. I'll give a really big example. Sometimes I see young people in unhealthy relationships. And sometimes they'll sit in that uncomfortable, bad relationship and they'll say, well, what do I do with this relationship now? And I'll ask a question. Can I ask first? First, you need to maybe step even farther back and ask yourself, is this the right relationship? Because it sounds like a lot of things you're saying that you really like these aspects, but you really don't like these aspects. And I want you to ask yourself this question. If you marry this person, are you comfortable if they never change? Or are you with this person hoping they will change? Because that means you're not in love with them, you're in love with who you hope they become. But they're not that. Will you be with that person forever, even if they never change? If the answer is no, then you're not with a person who's the person you want to spend the rest of your life with. That person you're just dreaming of. The step back would be the way to go. Maybe it's with certain things that we're watching or doing, or we'll try to make things in our life just work. But maybe the way forward is having to go backwards. I don't know, have any of you ever been driving with a GPS, and then you miss the turn, and then it's like, add 15 minutes, and you're like, no way. U-turn is the way to go, right? That is the way to go. Or do you just like, I guess it's 15 more minutes till I get back on track? No, sometimes the fastest and best way is to turn around and take the right way. That's got to be how we live our lives. We have to be reflective and ask ourselves, is this the way to do it? What's the purpose of this? Why am I doing it this way? I wish Absalom looked and said, is conspiring against my father and leading a rebellion against him the best way? Or maybe I could turn back around, revisit the bitterness and say, God, Dad, I'm mad at you. I'm mad. This thing, it's not going to work. Or you know, that bitterness and all of that fester into to something that is so broken that you feel like it can never be restored. Now, of course, God can restore all things. But God is calling us when we make mistakes in our life to sometimes reflect on whether or not we can go back. Is there a way back? I want you to give you some examples here. It says this. Hold on, I missed. I'll save that illustration for next time. Here's a good one. Nowhere to run. Oh, sorry, no. This is embarrassing. If anyone has my notes online, Know, I do know how to spell. Okay, know when to run. David's retreat in 2 Samuel 15 wasn't weakness. We're not there. I want to show you this retreat. Okay, so he's getting ready. After 4 years, so he's doing this for 4 years. Absalom said to the king, let me go and repay my vow that I made to the Lord while I was in Hebron. For I made this vow when I was living in Geshur, that's with his grandfather, in Aram. If the Lord really does allow me to return to Jerusalem, I will serve the Lord. The king replied to him, go in peace. So Absalom got up and went to Hebron. Then Absalom sent spies through all the tribes of Israel who said, when you hear the sound of the horn, you may assume that Absalom rules in Hebron. Now 200 men had gone with Absalom from Jerusalem. Since they were invited, they went naively and were unaware of what Absalom was planning. While he was offering sacrifices, Absalom sent for Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's advisor, to come from the city of Gilo. The conspiracy was gaining momentum, and the people were starting to side with Absalom. So Ahithophel, when you look at the crucial moments here, okay, we started with sin. That's not reconciling, so that's where Absalom's starting from. Ahithophel is a really wise, smart advisor and really close to David. But he was also the grandfather of Bathsheba. And you wonder, why is it that Ahithophel is going to turn on David? My suspicion is there's probably a lot of bitterness of what happened to Uriah still. All of these things have their seed and source in sin. All of these betrayals, these conspirings happen to do because somewhere along the way, David made mistakes that follow him for the rest of his life. And so just knowing who these people know and who they're related to can give you a sense of why it happens this way. Verse 13, then a messenger came to David and reported, the men of Israel are loyal to Absalom. So David said to all his servants who were with him in Jerusalem, come on, let's escape. Otherwise, no one will be delivered from Absalom. Go immediately, or else he will quickly overtake us and bring disaster on us and kill the city's residents with the sword. The king's servants replied to the king, we will do whatever our lord the king decides. So the king and all the members of his royal court set out on foot to the king, though the king left behind 10 concubines to attend to the palace. The king and all the people set out on foot, pausing at a spot some distance away. All his servants were leaving with him, along with all the Kerethites, all of the Pelethites, and all of the Gittites, some 600 men who had come on foot from Gath. They were leaving with the king. So when Absalom turned on David, announced himself king in Hebron, and was leading a rebellion, David left. He retreated. Now, this is strategic. And I will just say for us, one, we got to really evaluate where we're starting. We got to think about where we're starting, if our hearts are right, if our motivations are right. Then we got to think about and be reflective of why we are doing the things we are doing. What purpose is it? Because I think oftentimes we'll find at its source that we're being selfish. Sometimes I'll get home, and I'll go upstairs because I'm tired, and I'll ask myself, why am I basically doing nothing? Well, it's because I'm tired and I don't want to do anything right now. But I also know my wife, she's been gone even longer than me sometimes. And I can be gone for long periods of days. And I also know that there's lots of dishes in the sink. Selfish me says, that's her job. That's selfish me. I'm being honest. That's how I feel. But when you confront your motivations and all of them point to you, it ought to awaken you to say, is that the way a loving husband ought to think? Because that's who I want to be. And maybe even begrudgingly, I'll walk down the stairs and I'll do those dishes. But never once have I done something loving and nice so that my wife can come home and have reprieve. And I've been like, man, shouldn't have done that. Should have just laid on my stomach for half an hour. You know, that would have made me feel better. Never once. Not that I lay on my stomach often, guys, but it's good to try out now and again. But Jesus actually shows us the best way to retreat. Listen to this. Large crowds sometimes would come to Jesus. And it gives us a yet here. Luke 5:16. Yet Jesus himself frequently withdrew to the wilderness and prayed. You actually need to know in your own life whether you're up for the task. Can you actually do that? Paul says it this way, to he who thinks he stands, take heed lest he fall. I don't want to put myself in a compromising situation if I won't be strong enough to endure it. That's not helping. That's actually going to hurt people if all they see is me hurting myself or failing. And this will happen where maybe young people, especially when it comes to friendships, are balancing whether or not they can meaningfully be an influence on this person or they are actually just being influenced by this person. It's a really important thing to consider. Who's being influenced? Is it you or is it them? Because if all you're doing in this situation is hurting yourself, that's no good. In fact, King David, at the end of this 2 Samuel, it's the second to the last chapter, he says it this way, some people are like thorns. And it's like holding the thorns in your hands and squeezing. You're not helping them, you're hurting you. Think about whether or not you're in a position. Now, for Jesus, he would always help these people, but he set for us an example that we should receive our power and our strength from God first. He would withdraw. 2 Timothy 2:22, but keep away from youthful passions and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace with those who call the Lord from a pure heart. Proverbs 2:22, a shrewd person sees danger and hides himself, but the naive keep right on going and suffer for it. 1 Corinthians 10:14, so then, my dear friends, flee from idolatry. Matthew 10:14, if anyone will not welcome you or listen to your message, shake the dust off your feet as you leave the house or that town. There are some times where the best route is backwards, or to leave, or to flee, or you see danger and you hide. We did a drill, lockdown drill. We had Marion County come out here, and they kind of observed our lockdown drill. And we do options-based decision-making. If you can run away, you get away. If you need to hide, you hide. You lock down, you disappear. And unfortunately, if you need to fight, you fight. But really, flee first. Hide second. Fight third. But when I talk to my son, his first option is fight, I feel like, all the time, right? He's like, I was talking to my teacher, and they came in, I was going to throw books at him. I'm like, no, Rogan, no. Like, you are in 5th grade. You're not fighting, right? I want you to know that if you can get away, you run. He's like, yeah, but I could throw a book at his eye. Like, no, right? That option is not the go-to option, right? But in 5th grade, you're invincible, and you can apparently throw a book at 100 miles an hour at somebody's eye, right? They're like, oh, no, I didn't know they had books, right? So he is needing to learn from the instruction of people who are older than him that he needs to make really intentional decisions based on the circumstances that he's in. Sometimes you should really be reaching out to these people, but if you're seeing that they're totally unreceptive, and in fact, all they're doing is hurting you, you know what? There is times to walk away. There's times you might walk into a room and realize that room's not for you, and maybe you should leave it. There are times you might walk in a room and say, I can't influence this room. I can change the thoughts and the attitudes of this room, or at least through God, help that happen. We need to know when the time to run is. Matthew 7:6 says this way. It's probably the harshest of the ways he says it. Do not give what is holy to dogs, or throw your pearls before pigs. Otherwise, they will trample them under their feet and turn around and tear you to pieces. It's of little wonder that the missionaries who went to China, their sole objective was not to change the hearts and minds of the soldiers who were wanting to tear them to pieces. So God prepares the soil, okay? We are working the soil and the harvest. We are workers for this. But we have to recognize when the soil is ready and when it's not. And we can love people, but if we're so focused on people that are totally unreceptive, well, then all we're doing is hurting our own ministry. Oftentimes, all we're doing is hurting ourselves. And so I would say that this whole situation that we see unfolding here, one, David is wise. He does go away. He needs to address this, but now's not the time. I see that happen all the time in relationships with people. Well, we need to solve this right now when the tension is super high. You're allowed to intentionally say, let's take a break and let's revisit this. Let's take a break and then come back to this when cooler heads can prevail. I can go up to people, and when I see that they're really emotional, I don't always go up to them and say, I need to know everything right now. Maybe now's not the time. Options-based decision-making. But if you start off wrong, all your options are bad. Unless you treat the option of going back as realistic. Now, for you, some of you in your life might be facing all options that seem bad, maybe because you haven't looked behind you yet. Sometimes you need to turn around and go the other way. Not every option is a forward option. And I just love that that's exactly what the word repentance means. Repentance isn't finding a different way forward. It is literally a 180. It is a turning around. It is going the other way. So I'll just say this, when we hear this story, I think there's so much here in what's happening. It starts off wrong, therefore it ends wrong. Evaluate your own lives and ask yourself, am I starting from the right place here? Or is it selfish? Is it bitter? What's the purpose of the things that I'm doing right now? And then ask yourself, is it time to turn the other way? I don't know what that looks like in your life, but I know I have those in my life. I know I have them frequently. And my suspicion is many of you right now are thinking of scenarios in your own life where that might matter. And if it does, you have to have the courage and strength to do something about it. Please, let's not just be hearers of the word. Let's be doers of the word. Let's be people who look at the commands of Jesus and say, I want your will more than my own. Let me pray that. Lord Jesus, thank you that we can gather in your name. Thank you for your holy, awesome, wonderful word. God, thank you that we can be your church, your bride. God, you have called all of us to you. I pray that we would be people who do take serious what Paul says in Philippians chapter 2, God, that we would treat others as more important than ourselves. God, in the areas that we don't do that, help us. It is so easy to be selfish, to be self-centered. It's so easy to try to blaze a path forward in areas of our life where we're starting off in a bad place. God, teach us where to turn around. Teach us the areas in our life that we need to flee from, to let go from. God, help us to be just more intentional about your way over our way. God, we thank you that you are a way maker. God, and you have made a way through repentance to be reconciled to you. God, help us to start right there. Help us to start in a place that longs to be reconciled with you, that longs to be made right. God, in the areas in our lives that are in desperate need of your wisdom and your way, God, would you just break that in us? God, would you do things in us that are so incredible that we will be able to proclaim your miracles in us? We know that you are a God who does big, awesome, great things. God, but you also are in the small things. Help us to pay attention to the small ways, too, that we can work towards your will and way in our lives. God, help us not to be unreconciled in the way that Absalom and David were. Help us not to get caught up in bitterness and anger, God, that we would see the relationships in our own life that need reconciliation, God, that need to start off better. God, and if we need to, that we would know when to run away, when to turn around, when to fix it by leaving it. God, we thank you that you do show us those things. Help us to have earnest hearts that are leaning into you in all ways. We thank you again that we can exist as your church, that we can go over your awesome, wonderful word, God, that it changes lives, it changes us. We thank you for your grace. In your precious name, amen.